Hurricanes Helene and now Milton have devastated southern states with so far incalculable property damage from Milton, at least 16 reported fatalities now, and millions of people without power. While the impact of the storms is also having an impact on the presidential election, there are just 3 weeks to go until Americans, in fact, head to the polls. Here for another special edition of the Scrum and for the latest look at the state of the race, Eric Ham is a CTV News U.S. political analyst. Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter for The Washington Post, and Laura Dawson is the executive director of the Future Borders Coalition. Hi to all three of you. Such a pleasure to welcome you to the show. Eric, of course, to welcome you back. I'll start with you. In your assessment, how potentially have those hurricanes, and in particular this latest one, impacted the race?
Well, I think they've turned the race upside down. We know going into the election, North Carolina looked as though it was trending towards Kamala Harris. But with so much storm damage now and it being unclear where many of these voters will actually go, and if there's even a capable infrastructure to handle a presidential election, it's just unclear. In addition to that, we see just how tight the margins are also in Georgia, where they're still looking to clean up there. And of course, we know Democrats were pouring a lot of money into Florida, hoping to actually win both at the presidential as well as at the Senate level. So I think right now, all of these states have been turned upside down as a result of these two catastrophic storms.
On the wider state of the race, Aaron, obviously I'm watching from the, as an outsider, and I noticed this week, I guess I could discern like a change in some of the headline topics being discussed on a lot of cable news, from, the momentum that the Harris campaign has, to now some Democrats are worried that, in fact, the race has pulled back very tight, in particular in those swing states. Is that an accurate reflection of where things are at?
Yeah, it's really hard to say at this point. I would say that we haven't seen a whole lot of movement in recent weeks, pretty much ever since the debate last month between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I think Democrats would prefer that things had kept moving in their direction, and it simply hasn't done that. We've had close swing state polling throughout the last several weeks here, though. We haven't seen a huge change on that front. It still looks like it is a neck-and-neck race. It still looks like this is going to be something that's going to go down to Election Day. And I think right now what you're seeing, especially on the Democratic side, is what we saw a lot when Joe Biden was in the race. They're concerned about it because they're just that concerned about losing. It may not be about specifically what they're seeing in the polls, but they're still worried because it is very much a possibility that they lose this race. That's still on the table.
Laura, I saw you nodding when Aaron was referencing just how close, in particular in the swing states, things are and things do feel. If you look at the next 3 weeks, do you think there's anything that could happen or might happen that could change that scenario, or do you anticipate it's going to all come down to Election Day or however many days after it takes to get the full results?
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. It's really going to come down to Election Day. I mean, we look at the momentum that Kamala Harris had coming out of the gates, and it looked really, really strong. And now we look at polling data that just looks like this: neck and neck, one slightly over, one slightly under. And I think the hurricanes, the natural disasters, add some interesting dynamics to this. As Aaron mentioned, it's going to disrupt polling stations, but it's also about family level and person-to-person politics and people looking at really who's doing something for them. And for families that have lost their houses or have been displaced, much like in Canada with the wildfires, those folks are really unhappy. I mean, their politics are the farthest thing from their mind, but if they're going to vote, are they going to vote for the government in power that hasn't yet replaced their house, or et cetera? So what the Republicans want to do is cast the Democrats, the current Biden administration, in the worst possible light. We even hear conspiracy theories that if you take money from FEMA, they're going to come and seize your house. So they're really, there's a lot of exploitation of personal tragedy. And I think the dynamic that adds, it could go either direction, because you have a lot of Republicans in rural areas displaced, but you also have this discrediting and criticism of the current administration, and that they're not doing anything for you. In fact, they might even be the cause of this disaster.
Well, I mean, the last point that Laura makes there, Eric, was a really interesting to watch take place and unfold over the week, right? So these very, very specific accusations ranging from what Laura mentioned, like you caused this in order to win the election, to, the money for FEMA actually got directed towards migrants. Joe Biden in particular was coming out swinging all week back at that, and specifically at former President Trump. Do you see that making a difference with voters?
Actually, I see it perhaps boomeranging on Republicans, because now you're seeing a number of Republican lawmakers who are pushing back on this information, Republican lawmakers who are also recognizing the struggle in their states. So you have senators from North Carolina, lawmakers from Florida who are saying this is simply not the case. The government is actually on the ground, and they're actually getting the resources in place to help people who are in desperate need. But I think we go a step further, because if we're looking at these tight polls right now, and if you're looking at Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, this is where the ground game matters. This is where we know the Harris campaign has those boots on the ground, those offices that can actually get people to where they need to go, especially in a time like this where now you've got so much destruction and people may not know where to go to vote at this time. And it's always been curious, at least from people surrounding the Trump campaign, now that they have actually contracted out that GOTV, that get out to vote effort, is that going to work for Donald Trump? And I think this is where we now see if those ground games are going to hold for these respective candidates, particularly given when you have a race that looks like it's going to be so close on the margins.
Another interesting thing that stuck out to me, though, during all of that, beyond the potential impacts on the ground game, Aaron, was the degree of time the Democrats had to devote this week to rebuffing Trump and rebuffing those conspiracy theories and rebuffing those falsities. Like the whole week kind of got like the vacuum was filled with a conversation again about Trump. Even all the media appearances for the Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, you name it, like it was all about that. Does that potentially have a detrimental impact for Democrats because they're not talking as much about their own agenda?
Yeah, I mean, this is Donald Trump's playbook, and it has been for a very long time. He will say something, whether it's true or not, to focus interest on a given subject area. So last month he was talking about the idea that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were stealing and eating pets. He said that at the debate. And of course, there is absolutely no evidence that that's taking place. But what we saw, even in J.D. Vance's comments, his running mates, even in comments from the Trump campaign, is they felt that this at least focused on an area of the campaign that was good for them, which is talking about immigration. That's a net negative for the Democratic campaign. I do think there is a question, though, of are people going to judge Donald Trump as having exploited this national tragedy? You know, we don't have politicians politicizing these things instantly very often. And here he is out there saying things that are flatly untrue about these hurricanes, saying that the Georgia governor could not get in touch with President Biden, even after that Georgia governor said he had actually spoken to Biden. You know, I think there is a potential downside here in making Donald Trump look like he is part of the problem, like he's creating chaos in a situation that is already chaotic. And so Donald Trump's base generally believes the things he's saying about these kinds of things. We don't see the middle of the road voters necessarily subscribing to these things. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. But certainly it is a highly unusual politicization of a national tragedy right after it happens.
Laura, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about another comment that came from President Trump, nothing to do with hurricanes, but maybe a political hurricane potentially down the road for Canada. There was a time a number of years ago, I'm pretty sure I interviewed you 500 times in the year about this subject. I'm going to play for you and for the audience the wording from the president this week on NAFTA, taking aim at NAFTA essentially again, and the reaction from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Take a listen.
Upon taking office, I will formally notify Mexico and Canada of my intention to invoke the 6-year renegotiation provisions of the USMCA that I put in. It's coming due very soon. Oh, I'm going to have a lot of fun.
We've done this before. We can do that again if we need to, but we'll do it by putting Canadian interests first and foremost.
Okay, Laura, so is this surprising at all to you?
No, it's not a surprise at all. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We've known since the agreement was inked in 2020, the CUSMA USMCA, that there was a 2026 review. Now, Donald Trump is recharacterizing that as I'm going to open up this agreement and renegotiate it. But we've always known that this review in 2026 was part of the agenda. What is concerning is that he's really putting Canada and Mexico on notice that this isn't going to be the kind of routine administrative sit around a table and agree to renew the deal for the upcoming years, but rather wants to open it up, wants to go after those potentially problematic areas. And if he can't come to the kind of deal he wants, that would leave the CUSMA USMCA sort of in a state of flux, in a state of limbo, and that can cause investors and manufacturers in Canada to really kind of lose their nerve, to be a little bit chilled if that agreement is seriously put in jeopardy.
Oh boy, feels like deja vu. I'm going to leave our conversation there. Thank you all three of you for making the time for the discussion. I appreciate it very much. Eric Ham, Aaron Blake, and Laura Dawson.